This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? This is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is a priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about as a parent or caregiver, and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. Whether you're a wine mom or a 420 mom, you can enjoy grown-up relaxation and keep your child safe by following a few simple routines. Cannabis legalization has resulted in an increase in legal products, and illegal products containing cannabis are more widely available. Items such as candies or gummy bears, cookies, chocolate bars, drinks. An adult, never mind a child, is hard-pressed to identify products with cannabis or distinguish products that have or don't have cannabis. Because of their small size and faster metabolism, cannabis can be very harmful to children. Joining me today are Kim, Jen, and Mandy. Thanks for being part of Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
So let's dive into this topic. Cannabis can be very harmful to kids. And the same amount that an adult may take will have a bigger impact on children. Whether you have cannabis in your home or you visit homes where there is cannabis products, how do you think about safe cannabis storage in your house? And Jen, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would think about it the same way I would think about the storage of any kind of product that needs regulation or that we need to be cautious about. I see cannabis and I see the resemblance to candy and to different things that kids could see and think are something for them. But I think the same we could say for Advil that looks a lot like Skittles, or gummy vitamins that look a lot like gummy bears, or any number of, Tylenol that tastes like grape. And we do this as a way of attracting it to kids. And so I think about cannabis the same way I think about any of these products that we should be regulating as parents and be storing properly.
Yeah, Mandy, is that your approach as well? You think about it in the same way as you think about sort of over-the-counter medication?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that Jen brought that up because that was my first thought about it as well too, is I treat it the same way I would treat over-the-counter medication, the same way I would treat prescribed medication for me or for my children. I'm fortunate that I have a lock on the drawer, and actually that's where I keep Tylenol. Like you said, that's like my liquid Tylenol is in a drawer. And I think of it exactly the same way because it can be equally as harmful for them to have, too much Tylenol or to get a hold of a prescribed medication that they're not supposed to as well too. So I think about it in the sense that as the parent, it's then my responsibility to make sure that it is put away from them and add an extra layer of protection for them. So in my case, I've got it locked where I can. And I've often thought, is that a little like too, am I being too cautious on it there? But
yeah.
I really think I'd rather in that case be more cautious than have something happen. So I'm fortunate I have the lock there. So that's what we use for it. But interestingly enough, that's not the drawer that the cannabis products that are in my home would be in, right? Because I do keep them separate in that sense as well too, but equally as secure.
Kim, you're nodding your head. You have two young girls at 4 and 6, right? And, what's your approach to storage?
So it's interesting because I actually never thought of treating it the same way that we would treat over-the-counter medication. So obviously that stuff's not accessible, but because of the risk of cannabis and the fact that it's very hard to tell the difference. Whereas my kids can tell what Tylenol is, and half of the time I can barely get them to take that. Whereas an edible is far more enticing. It looks like candy. So in our household, we actually have like a lockbox for it and we lock it up completely.
Okay. Yeah.
But we've also taken the approach, maybe this segues into your next question potentially. We've taken the approach, we've been upfront with the girls. We've shown them the packaging. We've actually taken it out. We've done comparisons to their vitamins versus an edible. We've had them touch it. We've had them smell it. Because the reality is it may not happen in our home. It could happen at school where they're exposed to it. And what I want them to be able to have the tools and the skills to say, maybe I should question this. Maybe I shouldn't take this from my friend, or I see it on the ground and, oh, it's a candy. Like they put everything else in their mouth. You see a candy, like what if it's just a wrapped loose candy on the ground? And I want them to be able to ask themselves, is this something I should be eating? And ask themselves the question, does it smell funny? Does it look different? What's on the packaging? So our 6-year-old, thankfully, she can read. But our 4-year-old's not there yet. So I've shown her what the THC symbol looks like, the letters. We've had conversations about it. So that's kind of been our approach to mitigating their ability to access it.
I love that.
Yeah, you make a good point, because they could be at their friend's house and their parents have it, and their parents may not store it in the same way, and that they're questioning at least. And it will depend on the child whether you can take that approach or not.
That's a really great, I think that's brilliant to talk to them about it. And I think the other point to that, Kim, is that they're growing up in a world where there is more accessibility to it as well, right? And I think that's relatively new depending on how old your children are. But my children are 5 and 3, and they're growing up in a world where it's readily available to them. Like you said, I think the idea that it looks so similar, you're right, there could be that opportunity where they may not know the difference, and educating them about it and talking to them about it and being open about it also destigmatizes that there's anything wrong as well, right? I think that's such a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and you guys have touched a little bit on this, but edibles, I mean, they've become quite popular, and forms like cookies and candies, and it's hard to tell that product. I mean, if a cookie is just sitting on a table that has cannabis on it, I mean, it's hard to tell just from looking at it whether it has cannabis in it or not. And then layer on the fact that there's illegal products. So even though cannabis is legal in Canada, there are illegal products being made. So those that don't follow the regulations of how they can be packaged or how much THC can be in a product, etc. So, they look exactly like candy products. I've seen a couple of products that have caused some issues. For the poison centers are getting calls on these, and they look just like the Sour Patch Kids or, some of those candies. So, how do you tell them apart? And have you experienced confusion with a product that you thought, was legal, or that it didn't contain cannabis, but it did?
I have not experienced that since probably high school at a party. And that was well before legalization. Truthfully, I mean, my daughter is 2. We haven't been at that point yet because so much of what she ingests is so controlled by us. I love Kim's idea about just that communication with the kids and being open about it, because truthfully, I mean, we grew up in a world where cannabis was very stigmatized. We don't talk about pot, and we don't, you don't do it in my house kind of a thing. And now, I mean, literally every street corner has a cannabis store on it, and it's something you see out and about, and it's something you see at family members' homes or your own home. And so I think for us, it's going to be really emphasizing that open communication, like Kim was suggesting. And I think it's also about having open communication with the other people in your life that are using cannabis products or having cannabis products around their house, because I know we've got family members that don't have young children around all the time, but we're over there. And so making sure that we're transparent with them about our expectations for our child's safety, the same way I wouldn't expect them to leave a knife around on a counter when we're around or whatever.
Yeah, Mandy, have you had any experience in products that you either weren't sure had or had cannabis in it, or have you seen any of those illegal products that maybe have that sign that Kim you were talking about, the symbol for THC. When you rip open the package, that symbol is gone. I mean, that's one
Yeah.
major red flag about that this product is not legal.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's quite interesting. And admittedly, I have, I've used a product called Bedtime Bears, and they're literally like gummy bear shaped. And I remember feeling like this feels a little odd. Like it was kind of like why this shape? But interestingly enough, so, tucked away in closets and things like that for them as well. But I have actually had the experience a little bit where I was at a gathering with people, and my daughter was there. She was probably about 2 at the time. And it was a joke that was made about cookies and that they were, there was pot in the cookies. And I'm like, oh my God, like, okay, now I'm having a complete panic attack about it. And then running around being like, no, I really need someone to be honest with me about whether, like, do I need to panic or am I just overreacting here? Fortunately it was a joke, but it was again, kind of as Jen mentioned, I was one of the first to have children at the time. So my daughter was young and nobody else there, had kids yet. And you're like, oh God. But, fortunately it wasn't the experience of it, but I can absolutely understand how easily that could be a mistake or, if you're not realizing that you need to be more cautious when there's children there, or you don't really realize that that's what's there, how that could become a real scare for a parent or, for, even for the people who are there as well too. Right. And the child, of course.
I think I could foresee it moving a little bit. I hope. And I mean, we're all kind of new to this whole kind of social cannabis use. But I'm hoping to see it in the future, the way you go to kind of a gathering and you say, oh, is there alcohol in the punch? Right? It's just one of those questions that doesn't get judgment, but that is an important question to be asking for whether or not we're going to be giving it to our kids, right? And I don't think anybody hosting a party would be offended if you said, hey, is there alcohol in the punch? Oh no, it's just fruit juice. Perfect. I'm going to give some to my kid. And it should be, I'm hoping we move into the direction where now that cannabis is so social that we're able to say, hey, is there weed in the cookies? No? Okay, awesome. And just have that be the end of that conversation without there being that kind of, at the expense of the jokes. Because for us as parents, I mean, I probably would have made jokes like that before I was a mom too. But not anymore.
Kim, I'm interested in this whole that I hadn't thought about, but yeah, the whole idea that this is relatively new, and you three are representative of parents who are encountering this kind of thing for the first time, where there is so much availability of legal products that are now in your home, that where it probably was, sort of hidden before. And then the whole dosage thing. What do you know is in terms of the dosage that are on those packages, and so how do you deal with all of that? But in and amongst your friends, Kim, is that sort of some of the conversation? Like, we're the first kind of group that's kind of finding our way through this.
Yeah, you raise a very valid point. It's funny, I don't see it that way, but I think it's just because it's always been in my world. And I think the only thing that has really changed for me personally is kind of taking away the stigmatism of it. Cause, I have close family members who now use it, who, when we were growing up, were very adamant. I would never use that. Oh my goodness. Like, it was just total taboo. And it's funny now because these same people are the same people who are now using it. So yeah, I can appreciate though that sometimes it's very hard to tell just by looking at it, but that's why I've gotten the girls, like, we've had ginger cookies and I've said, let's take a look, break it apart, smell it, touch it. What do you think? Do you think it's something that you should eat? And then the other flip side of that is I just always tell them, you should be asking before you put anything in your mouth. Like with Charlie, as an example, we regulate her diet, especially with sugar, because she has allergic reactions. So with her, it's important that she one, ask me before she puts something in her mouth, but also because I need to know, well, how much have you had today? Can either your dad or me say yes to another item, or is it going to push you over the edge type of thing? So she's been pretty good with that, and she's our younger one. So that's kind of the way we've kind of approached it. Because the reality is maybe there is going to be a product that you can't smell it, or maybe the like at Halloween in particular, you hear all these stories about my kid ended up with a package of edibles and it looks identical to Fuzzy Peaches or Sour Patch Kids, right? So how else do you get in front of it? So I'd rather it be me teaching them about it and showing them versus them learning from their friends or being misinformed by looking things up on the internet. The reality is it's here, right? And it's so readily available, whether I want them to access it or not. So I'd rather be a part of that conversation versus like dealing with it after the fact.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we have to wrap up this session, but I think it's a really important conversation that we've had. And I thank the three of you for helping to remove that stigma and being open and sharing information either with your kids or having those conversations with your family and friends, as you said, Jen, to have those, the conversations and not have it sort of hidden behind closed doors, because as you just said, Kim, it is here and it's around, it's going to be here. So how do we deal with it as parents? And then how do we teach our kids in ways that are appropriate for their ages, what the dangers are without sort of scaring them, but really just making them aware that some things are things that they need to check with parents before they eat. So thanks so much for sharing your perspectives, your ideas. I know you've put forward some really great ideas for each of us to think about. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Safe storage is your best strategy to keep cannabis out of your child's reach. Learn why it's important to keep your cannabis high and locked at parachute.ca/high and locked. That's parachute.ca/high and locked.
It's time to open your parachute.
Patty Stark is the Community Mobilization Coordinator at the Injury Prevention Centre in Alberta and works with individuals, groups, and communities to support building and strengthening capacity to develop, implement, evaluate, and sustain activities to address local injury issues. Welcome to the podcast, Patty.
Thanks, Pam. It's great to be here.
Patty, cannabis is a legal product in Canada, so the focus really is primarily on how to keep products with cannabis out of the hands of children. So what are some of the things that parents might not think about when having cannabis in the house?
Well, I think one of the really important things about cannabis products is many of them are edibles that look exactly like the treats that kids would normally have: cookies, candies, brownies, cakes. And so once that's sitting there, you can't tell if it's a cookie with a cannabis in it or if it's a cookie that's safe to eat. So I think that's one of the things, is that they're really hard sometimes to identify as containing cannabis. And so it really becomes important for the adults and caregivers to make sure that those products are stored up out of reach. And even when they take them down to use them, that again, they go back up and they're stored locked up tight and out of sight. And then thinking too, if you're using a cannabis product and baking with it or creating your own yummy goodies, that again, you need to think about storing those goodies locked up and out of sight and out of reach.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like visually, they look very similar to things that we might, eat on a regular basis. And I mean, even an adult, never mind a kid, looking at that product, they wouldn't necessarily know that it has cannabis in it. What have you seen in terms of the incidences of cannabis poisoning to children over the past number of years? I know edibles have definitely come onto the market, and the increase in numbers that there are available out there has increased. What has been the result of that?
So what we're actually seeing since legalization of cannabis products is researchers are starting to identify now that we are seeing an increased number of children that are are needing to be treated at the hospital because they've been essentially poisoned by cannabis. And that is on the rise, particularly in children under 10. And certainly as well, when we talk to our poison centers across the country, they are also identifying that they have been receiving more calls from parents and caregivers concerned that their kids have eaten something that contained cannabis or been exposed.
And it affects kids differently than adults, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really, particularly because kids are small, so the dose and relative body size is higher than for them, and it can make them sleepy, uncoordinated, and really, in serious cases, it really requires medical intervention. They can't breathe, so it can be really serious and scary for kids.
And then we have, cannabis is legal, but we have illegal products that I know we've heard from the poison centers that they've had calls about. Why is it so important that parents be aware and buy legal, if you will, to make sure that the products that they are buying, aren't illegal products and not made to be sold in Canada?
Well, certainly those illegal products look really colorful and the packaging looks very similar to those candies and things, which is not allowed if you're actually selling legal cannabis. There are very strict regulations about how the packaging can look. But the other thing with the illegals is that in many cases, the doses are very, very high, even for adults.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not regulated. So even though it may say that it's this dose on the package, it may not necessarily contain that. It may contain more. It may contain less. The other thing is that because they're not regulated, there may be other things in those products that we don't really want to be consuming either, like molds and bacteria and other chemicals. So really sticking to the legal products that we know have an identified dosage and we can identify, which then makes it easier to treat in the event that somebody is accidentally consuming a cannabis product and needs medical help.
Right, because when they call for help, to a poison center and they go into the emergency room, the first thing that the physician or the poison center specialist is going to ask is, what did they take and how much and what's in it? And those legal products will have that information on the packaging, whereas the illegal ones, may or may not, or they may not have all of the information that you need. They may not have that information about those other substances that aren't supposed to be in there, but are. They would unlikely to list it. What we heard from some of our parents, from the discussion was really interesting about them, talking to their kids about what they can and shouldn't eat, or what to ask whether they can eat. And it really reminded me of the approach around allergies to nuts and other foods, and teaching kids that, who have those allergies, or kids who are going to school with other children who have those allergies, how to approach food. That's one way to keep cannabis away from kids and high and locked, as we say, a little play on words there. But what are some key tips that you would want to share with parents about how to lock those products up and keep them away from their kids?
We need to make sure that those products are stored in locked cabinets. So whether that's, above the fridge in a cabinet that children have difficulty reaching. Some people actually have a lockable drawer or a lockable closet or something where they would store their cannabis, along with things like medications and other products that we don't want our kids to get into. There are also products that you can buy from cannabis retailers too that are lock boxes that are actually quite attractive looking, that you can store the products in. And then I think the other thing to think about is when we have people visiting our homes, they may have cannabis in their jackets, in their bags. And so we need to have that conversation and make sure that if those products are coming in with our guests and our family, that they again are being stored in a way that our kids aren't going to get into them. And if grandma and grandpa are coming for an extended visit, what are they bringing in? Are there some cannabis products we may need to think about finding a place to store while they visit?
I think that's a really good point. People listening may think, well, I don't have cannabis in the house, but whether they have visitors that come to the house or you go to someone else's house that has it in their house, that you're hoping that they would store it correctly. But those are some good tips for parents to think about, whether they have it in the house themselves or whether they have guests that are coming into their house. The other thing is that the packaging that you talked about, the legal packaging, it's packaged in child-resistant packaging, but that doesn't mean it's child-proof.
No, that's right. That testing is actually done where they give children the packaging and they give them a certain period of time. And if they don't get it open in that period of time, then it passes our child-resistant test. But it's not child-proof. And everybody has a story about a child they know who likes to take things apart and is very persistent. So with enough time and persistence, children can get past those things. So it's a layer of protection, but we need to ensure that we have it stored up high, locked up tight as well.
Well, thanks, Patty. It has been a really interesting conversation, and I think you've shared a lot of important information and some really good tips for parents to keep their kids safe from cannabis. So thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks, Pam. It was fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity, whose mission is for Canadians to live long lives to the fullest by preventing serious and fatal injuries. We release episodes every 2 weeks. Next episode, we'll be talking about concussion. Help us reach parents and caregivers by sharing this link with your friends and family and giving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This is Story Studio Network.